Hello, everyone. Welcome to Women Work Your Faith. My name is Sylvia Johnson, and today I'm going to be reviewing the Sunday school lesson for Sunday, February the 23rd. And let's see, the title for February 23rd is A Community Shares Its Resources. The Bible basis comes from 2 Corinthians, the 8th chapter, the 1st through the 14th verse. The Bible truth: a small community that possesses much can contribute to a larger community. Memory verse: therefore, as ye abound in everything, in faith and utterance and knowledge and in all diligence, and in your love to us, see that ye abound in this grace also. 2 Corinthians, the 8th chapter, the 7th verse. The lesson aim for this Sunday's lesson: by the end of the lesson, we will recall Paul's attempt to get Christian communities to help one another when there was a need. Sense the need to sometimes contribute to a larger cause than ourselves and decide to respond to a need in the larger faith community. So, welcome. Thank you for joining me today. This lesson, I believe, will be quite a bit shorter than last week's lesson. Thank you, Jesus. So I just have a few points to talk about. As you all know, I'm Team Paul. So I do enjoy reading and talking about his lessons and sharing what I get out of them when I look at his letters. And there are some pretty good points for living in here as usual. And so just to give you a little background story, we study frequently the Corinthians. But in the second book of Corinthians that's in your Bible, Paul is writing, and he's writing to the church in Corinth, and where the lesson picks up, he has just made a case for the holiness of his ministry, the integrity and the character of himself as an apostle of Christ and a disciple of Christ, and what the purpose of this ministry is, and the ministry of reconciliation, and how he lives it and they live it as they share it and teach it to the other churches, such as the one in Corinth. And so the question has come into play, what his, I guess you could say, what his purpose or what his aim is, what's his angle, why is he coming to us asking for things, and what's going on with him. And so he's defending his work in the Lord, and also calling the church to come together to support one another and love one another. And so the lesson picks up in the 8th chapter, where he's been making a remark about the church of Macedonia, and he makes a pivot here where the lesson picks up in the 8th chapter, the 1st verse. And so it says, starting in the lesson, moreover, brethren, we do you to wit of the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia, how that in a great trial of affliction, the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded unto the riches of their liberality. And so he's talking about another church outside of Jerusalem. And he's making a witness for them. And he wants to, as your Sunday school book states, make known the grace of God, the gift of God that was made through this church. And so it's like saying, let's look at this church, or take this for example, okay? And so he's talking about the gift of God through these people in this church, and they came and answered in a great time of need. And it says, the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty. So the combination of the two, the abundance of their joy, they had a great amount of desire and want and gladness to do the work of the Lord, right? And you probably know people like that. Like, they just want to do whatever God will have them to do, but they don't have the abundance of the resources. But however, that willingness and that desire to do more than compensates for what they lack in tangible things. And if you know someone It's kind of like that saying, if there's a will, there's a way, right? And so if you know someone who is a worker, a giver, a lover, a doer, and you find them in situations and you're like, how are they ever going to accomplish this thing? Or how are they ever going to help these people? And then you turn around and it's done, right? And so we're talking about people like that, okay? And it says in the third verse, for to their power I bear record, yea, and beyond their power they were willing of themselves, praying as with much entreaty that we would receive the gift and take upon us the fellowship of the ministering to the saints. And so they did whatever it is that they could do, okay? Even when you have little, it is much when given as unto the Lord. And so what he's pointing out about this church is they insisted. It says, entreaty that we would receive the gift. Okay. And so they petitioned them, and when I say they petitioned them, the church petitioned Paul and the other people working with him in the field, that they would take this gift, that they would allow them to give and to contribute. And so, like I just said, even when you don't have much, it's a lot when given as unto the Lord. And so they wanted to do the work of God and support the saints. And so what does this support the saints? In your Sunday school book, it gives you a little bit of history and it tells you where to reference it in the scriptures. Paul, when he would go on his missionary journeys, he was given the instructions not to forget the poor, right? And so he would do collections for the poor in Jerusalem. And he would collect from the other churches because Paul was going to the Gentiles who typically seem to be in a better financial position, right? And so if you have a reference Bible like mine, it will tell you a little bit about places like Ephesus and Corinth. And so you look at this and you see that you have these converts who have come to Christ, who may be from these areas of commerce and may have more resources or more population they can give, right? And so Paul was collecting, which is also a reason why people question his integrity and what his motive was, right? Because he's asking for them to give to the church in Jerusalem. And so here he gives the example of the church of Macedonian, and they not only want to do something, but they are petitioning them to let them help. And they give, it says, I bear record, yea, and beyond their power they were willing of themselves. So they were willing to give above and beyond what you would have thought they had available, and petition them to take it. And then it says in 5, and this they did, not as we hoped, but first gave their own selves to the Lord and unto us by the will of God. And so think about your giving. Think about the resources that you have first. Think about what you have available. Have you given up everything unto God? And that's the point he's making here. The first thing that we do as disciples of Christ, as people who are living for the Lord, people who follow after the Spirit, the first thing we should do is to give ourselves up over to him, to submit our will over to him, to seek him for our day-to-day life choices, right? And so they gave, but not according to what they thought they would do. First, they submitted themselves to God, and then they submitted themselves to whatever was needed according to God's will. And so remember, I said, if you don't have much, it's a lot when it's given as unto the Lord. And so think about, I was talking to a girlfriend of mine, and we talk about God math, and I'll probably mention that a couple of times, right, today. And you're wondering where this came from. You know, I just was going to do a little bit, or I just was going to make, you know, a little extra food for someone, or give a little extra in the offering. And when you look, there was so much more there. Or it grew. We don't even know how it grew, right? And so their giving was as unto God, and they did it after submitting themselves to him. And so ask yourself, are you giving according to his will? Have you submitted yourself to God? Have you talked to him about, and I'm not just talking about like offering, okay? At church, in between, testimony service and the message. I'm talking about give freely. Your time, your resources. I use an example. I work in healthcare. I have people, quite a few people who volunteer. We have about 200 plus volunteers where I work. They go to the homes of people who are sick. They give groceries and food. They do camps and counseling sessions with families and the children of people who have been ill or dying. They make blankets and donate clothes and all sorts of activities and things. And they're not reimbursed for this. Like, yes, they could claim it on their taxes, but each person who volunteers where I work gives according to what they have. I have people who do music because that's what they do. Like they play a harmonica or a guitar or something, and they come and they play at bedside for people. That gift is of great value because it's all they have. That, it's one thing for the person who can write a check for $50,000, but for the person that doesn't have that, what they give is of so much value. And so it's not something that I thought that I would get. But once a person, and most of them do this, when they come in to volunteer, they'll tell you it is a conviction they have according to their faith that they must do this. But once a person submits themselves to the will of God, then what they give is by his will, and it's over an abundance of what we need. And so have you given according to his will is the question I'm asking us to ask ourselves. I have here the word abound. And so abound means a lot, excess, above and beyond. And so when you see something abounding, it is free and flowing excessively, okay? And so as we go on in verse 6, it says, insomuch that we desired Titus, that as he had begun, so he would also finish in you the same grace also. Therefore, as ye abound in everything, in faith and utterance and knowledge, and in all diligence, and in your love to us, see that ye abound in this grace also. So, because our drawing from this example that he gave of the church of Macedonia, Paul is saying, we desire Titus that as he had begun, so he would also finish in you the same grace also. So there's a giving ministry in the church of Corinth. And looking at this example of the church of Macedonia and how this has come about, we say to you that we want this to continue as it started there, okay? And, it says the same grace, the same gift. He fully expects the result of their giving to be a blessing from God, to be the gift of God to those who are in need. And he's asking them to work in that faith, to be a part of the ministry of that grace. And so he says, as ye abound in everything. So he's talking about how they are abounding, flowing freely and excessively in their faith, in their utterance, their confession, their speaking of it, their knowledge, their understanding of Christ and the things of him, in all diligence, your faithfulness in your work and your pursuing of things, and your love. All of this you're doing well in. You're doing well and above. You're growing and well pleasing in those areas. Be abounding in this also. And so to put it into context with us, I'm saved, right? I don't do the things I used to do. I separated myself. I'm living a sanctified life. I'm studying my word. I am testifying of my change in my life, right? I'm understanding God and what he is teaching through his spirit. And okay, great. Be great in this too. Be great in giving. And not just, again, it's not just, I pay my tithes and offering. I'm not knocking those, okay? But I was listening to this podcast, and I never thought of it this way. But it made perfect sense when he said it, that's the way sometimes it's thought of. And the man, he abounded in salary, okay? He made a lot of money, way more than I'm making in my little healthcare nonprofit, right? And he talked about, he went to church faithfully, and he was married, took care of his kids and his wife. And he said, I paid my tithes and my offering regularly. He had a 6-figure salary, well and over 6-figure salary, right? So if you can think about what his salary was, his tithe, if he was tithing at 10%, would have been 5 figures a year, right? So over tens of thousands of dollars that he was giving in tithes to his church. And he said, and I did it because I thought it was required. And this is what he said that caught my attention. He said it was like my admission price for being in the church, or my membership fee or something. And I was like, I never thought about that. But he was just giving because they told him he had to give it, and he thought it was a check on the box of how to be a good Christian. But then he gives the testimony about God got to dealing with him, and he thought that he was going on into the next place in life in his career. And he was already at, 6 figures in some. And God told him to leave his job and go work at this other place, serving, other populations that don't have the same income that he does. And he realized that there is no admission price to the kingdom that other than a faithful life serving God. And so I tell that story to say that God valued, and he learns that God valued more what he gave when he had less. Because what he gave out of faithfulness. What he gave out of obedience and commitment to the will of God. He gave at that point. Before, he was just trying to get in, and he was given what he thought he had to do. But now he had given his life and submitted himself to the will of God. And he talked about that change and how different he views things now. And so I gave that whole story because here he's saying, as you abound in faith, utterance, knowledge, and in all diligence in your love to us, see that ye abound in this grace also. We should be abounding in giving. And it's hard for some people, and it's hard for not. And I think with the example that I gave, it seems like it'd be harder for us when we have less. But the value of what we give when we have less to give is so different to us in our hearts. And so God's desire is that we all love one another. And that we all be one, and that we help support and take care of one another. And part of that is giving, being a blessing to one another, loving our brother as ourselves. All of that is in our giving. And so he continues on. Make sure I got all my points. Okay, got all of that. So he continues on to say, I speak not by commandment, but by occasion of the forwardness of others, and to prove the sincerity of your love. And so he's saying, I'm not ordering you to do this, okay? I'm saying this as an example of what the other church has done, and so that you can show that you are faithful and that you love your fellow man, your fellow saints of God also. And so it's not kind of like the guy who had the thought that I got to pay the admission price. Like this is a tax on Christianity, right? That's not what it is. What it is an act of love. And so look at the example of the hearts of those that have done it. And remember that you love that way also. And this is how you demonstrate that. And he says in verse 9, for ye know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, that ye through his poverty might be rich. And so he gives us the ultimate giving example, right? Jesus. It says he was rich, right? Jesus was with the Father at the beginning. He was there. He was the spoken word, right? He's the living word. And here he was in this status. And the other example is when he says he thought it not robbery, right? He lowers himself. He comes down from glory to walk on earth among us. And I've talked about this before. He came to earth in the most vulnerable state, right? He had to suffer through childhood and puberty and adolescence and grow as a man before he could do the work that his Father sent him to do. And so he was rich, but he became poor. He became lowly with nothing. He didn't have any money. He didn't have a name for himself, right? He didn't have a great lineage. He came from the line of David, but he was born somewhere where they thought no good thing could come from. He was and he didn't even have a place to be born. He was in a little shabby barn, laying in a feeding trough. And so here he lowered himself in the lowest position possible so that we might be made rich. And so in him lowering himself, he gave the only thing he had when he came to earth, right? His life. He gave the only thing he had. And we became rich. And what did we inherit? Everything. The kingdom of heaven. Life eternal. Reconciliation and peace with the Father. And so in him giving in his poorness, in his poverty, he gave us full richness beyond what we could ever think. And so think of your giving in those lines. It's not about you counting worldly standards of what the value of something is. I have this debate. Pray for me. I try not to debate it, but every now and then somebody rubs me and I got to bring it up. But I talk about this in the church. We like things to shine and sparkle, and everything got to be nice and got to be the best. And I say all the time, there are people who don't have that, who can't afford that, who can't make that, can't buy that, can't get that, but they want to give you what they have, and they want to feel like they're contributing. And the truth is, the value of what they give in that state is great in the eyes of God, because it's all they have. They can't just write you a couple $100 check and say, woohoo, I bless, the church and the man of God or whomever. If all they can do is bring you that pie they baked or sweep the floor after the function because they can't afford to actually help pay for the ticket or whatever, then that is great and a blessing. And it's an act of grace from a God. So, tell me what you think about that. You might not agree with me, but I told you it's a topic I got to keep bringing up every now and then because I believe it wholeheartedly. If we go on, it says in 10, and herein I give my advice, for this is expedient for you who have begun before, not only to do, but also to be forward a year ago. And so it's a credit to them because they wanted to do this a year ago. It speaks to them as believers and as people who love others that a year ago they had a desire and a zeal to do this thing. And in 11 it says, now therefore perform the doing of it, that as there was a readiness to will, so there may be a performance also out of that which you have. For if there be first a willing mind, it is accepted according to that a man hath, and not according to that he hath not. And he says, do it. You wanted to do it, do it. You had the desire to do it, finish it. Because if you have a willing mind, then what you give is accepted according to what you have. It's not judged according to what you don't have. It's not held to the standards of, someone else's deep pockets, rich wallet. No. When you're submitting yourself to God and you're giving as an act of grace, of his grace, it's not measured by those measurements. We do God math in this case. And so it's about what he's blessed you with, because what he's blessed you with is what he intended for you to give anyway. Remember we talked about the anointing and the blessings that God put on his people, and the blessing was never for the person, it's for the people. So whatever it is that God has blessed you with, whether it be the ability to grow apples, or maybe you can write books and songs, maybe you teach Sunday school, right? You gotta give it. And you give according to what you have. And so it's all about the willingness of your mind and your heart to do this thing. And so he goes on and he says, "For I mean not that other men be eased and you burden, but by an equality, that now at this time your abundance may be a supply for their want, that their abundance also may be a supply for your want, that there may be equality." And so he's not intending for your giving to break you, to defund everything you have. It's not about giving up everything to the point of suffering. That's actually not what God's desire is. It's worth more if you're willing to give and accept it at that level of what you can give according to God's will. And in his will, you're cared for and I'm cared for. The next brother is cared for and the next sister is cared for. He does not intend for us to be without. And so make sure that you are giving according to God's will and understanding that he's pleased by it. An example here, I think it's in Mark. A little too far. Mark, the 12th chapter, the 41st verse, it says, "And Jesus sat over against the treasury and beheld how the people cast money into the treasury, and many that were rich cast in much. And there came a certain poor widow, and she threw in 2 mites, which make a farthing. And he called unto him his disciples, and said unto them, Verily I say unto you, that this poor widow has cast more in than all they which have cast into the treasury. For all they did cast in out of their abundance, but she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all her living." And so Jesus is watching them put in money, right? They're doing their giving. And he sees a woman come in and she gives pocket change. She gives 2 mites, which is a farthing. It's a little bit of money, very minimal. And her giving catches his attention. So much so that he points it out to his disciples and teaches them a lesson from this. And so when you have an abundance to give, it's not a sacrifice. When it didn't cost you anything, it's not a sacrifice. Remember when David sinned against God and he went to the threshing floor, and the man who owned it was like, "Here, you can have it, king." And he was like, "No, I will not sacrifice to God that which cost me nothing." And he paid him for it, right? Well, think about your giving in that way. When you look at this woman with 1 mite, if David had given, right, because he was king, he could have, over abused his power and taken that and tried to make a sacrifice to God. It didn't cost him anything. It did not lend itself to show how he trusted God with his provision, how he gave his best and his most important to the Lord. But because it was a sacrifice, it was valued now. And it's the same way with this woman with 2 mites. It was a sacrifice. She was a poor widow. She did not have much to give. And she could have thought to herself, since I don't have anything, I probably should save this, right? But instead, she gave it to God. Her desire was for that little bit to be a blessing. And so when you think about how we give, we get kind of hung up on what it is and how much it is. But what Paul is teaching here is that you need to have a willingness of mind, that it's an act of love, and it's a gift or a grace of God that we should be working in. And it's according to what we have. What you have will provide for another person when they're in need, and what they have will be a blessing to you when you're in need. And so that's how we need to look at our giving. So going back to our lesson aims, recall Paul's attempt to get Christian communities to help one another when there was a need. And so that's just what I was talking about. Giving according to what you have in the will of God. Even a little bit is much to him, especially when that little bit is what you have. That's all you got. If you have an abundance and you're only giving a little bit, it's totally different conversation. Something wrong there. But if all you have is a little, don't despise the small beginnings, okay? If what you have is a little, it's enough for God. And be glad to share it and give it according to his will. Sense the need to sometimes contribute to a larger cause than ourselves. Again, you don't have to judge what you have and whether or not it can make a difference. I told you about the people that I work with and all the things that they do that make a difference in the lives of people who are sick or dying. And so there should be something in us because we should have the mind and the heart of Christ, right? There should be something in us that should let that mind be in you and have you come down from glory or whatever high position you're in, whatever well-off position you are in, to see about those who are not in the same position as you and who could benefit from whatever it is that you have to give. And then it says, and decide to respond to a need in the larger faith community. I think that's a given. So, you can go to your church, or if you have a local ministry for your YWCC or your Purity and Sunshine Band, or your we have the Business and Women in Business Federation. I think there are lots of bands and auxiliaries that should have a ministry. And if you're not working in one, think about that. What is it that we're called to do as believers? And like Paul says at the end, at this time, your abundance may be a supply for their want, and that their abundance also may be a supply for your want. That there may be equality, because we should give to one another. So that concludes this week's lesson. Like I said, it is much shorter than last week's. I hope you enjoyed it. I do plan to be back next week for Sunday school. As always, put your message or your comments or your questions in the comment section. Be blessed, and I will see you next time.